Are you ready for another episode of Making Money with Woodworking and Smalls That Sell? In this series, we take what's hot and trending at the big box stores and we break those down so that you can create your version of these trending items to either keep for yourself or to sell as a part of your woodworking side hustle. One of the most important things about this series is that we only focus on high profit, low cost items. It means that you can keep more money in your pocket while putting more money in your pocket. If you're selling these items, you need to make sure to mix in a couple of these medium-sized projects like this rustic farmhouse cubby box. So the reason why I'm considering this kind of like a medium-sized build is because it's one of those builds that kind of looks complex whenever you first look at it, but as you break it down, you realize that it's super easy to build. So one of the first things that caught my eye about this is the design itself. Back whenever I used to run an antique store, yes, that's been one of my several different businesses. Anything that had multiple cubbies like this would sell just like that. Now they've designed this one to kind of look like an old post office box, maybe an industrial style bin system, which either way, it's pretty cool and would be super handy for a lot of things. For me trying to sell one of these things, I would definitely stage it up maybe beside a door. Each one of these cubbies with like a family member's name on it, and then put like sunglasses, keys, wallet, things like that in each one of the bins, showing that yes, it can be used as a nice piece of decoration, but it's also functional. So let's go ahead and get into how they made this thing. So this cubby box is roughly 6 inches deep by 16 inches tall by 21 inches wide. All the material that they've used to make this, it looks to be around a 1/2 inch thick. So right off the bat, of course, my mind kind of goes to pallet wood or fence picket material. Okay, so for this build, you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit. And things like this is what this series is kind of training you to be able to do. To just be able to look at something and figure out how it was made. So for this box, I need you to picture it in kind of like an exploded view. Okay, so what would it look like if it didn't have the sides, the top? Now pull off the front slats of this. And if you're not quite to the point of being able to do that, don't worry about it. It just comes with time and practice. So with all these parts pulled out, the inside of this, or the part that's actually making up these little cubbies, it's going to look like a big tic-tac-toe board. Or something like this. And that is what we're going to make first. And you may be thinking, okay, so there's going to be a lot of little bitty cuts put together, glued, all that stuff. No, that's not how they built this. They actually built it to interlock. So we're going to say that the inside material is 6 inches. It's actually probably closer to 5.5, but just for the explanation part, we'll say 6. So each one of these inside boards, both the horizontal and vertical boards, are going to have notches that go 3 inches or halfway through the board. And just as an example, it's going to look something like this. And the whole point of these is so that whenever we interlock the two boards, it gives us a perfect joint without having to deal with any small parts or anything like that. Plus, it's a lot more stable. So you may be asking, how do you cut these little notches? So if we're saying that this is 1/2 inch material, that means that our notch needs to be 1/2 inch wide. And since this is 6 inches wide, I just cut my notch 3 inches deep with a jigsaw. Yes, these two notches were simply notched out with a standard jigsaw. Now that's going to be one way to make these. Another way that you can make these notches is on the table saw if you have a sled or a miter gauge. You'd actually just cut your material standing up and either using a single blade and multiple passes or a dado blade set at a 1/2 inch, you just run it back and forth until a 1/2 inch of your material has been removed, making this. And since all the horizontal parts are going to have the same amount of notches and all the vertical parts are going to have the exact same amount of notches, you can actually stack these and cut several notches into your material at once, making these super fast to put together. But regardless of how you decide to cut your notches, that's how the inside of all of this is assembled. So what about our spacing for this? For the 3 16-inch vertical boards, we'll be putting notches at 5 inches and 10 inches. And then for our two 21-inch horizontal boards, each one of those will have 3 intersections and we'll cut those notches at 5, 10, and 15 inches. So for our top and bottom boards, they're actually going to hang over on each end of our sides, creating a butt joint. So these two boards are going to need to be 22 inches long each. Then our two side boards, they're going to be the exact same length as the rest of our vertical boards. So 16 inches long each. Then we'll just square those up with the inside that we've made, use some wood glue and brad nails to attach all of this together. Then I would go ahead and attach my backing. Now this is going to be up to you on whether you use solid wood for this or plywood or MDF like they have. Completely up to you. 1/4 inch plywood would be a lot easier to cut this to size, or if you decide to go with solid wood, you just line it up all the way down the back, installing brad nails as you go. So this is where you have to kind of weigh things out. The 1/4 inch plywood would be a lot easier, but the solid wood and slats in the back, I think would look a lot better. But again, Completely up to you. And then with our back attached, the only thing left to do is to attach these front strips and our little label holders. These front strips will just sit on top of everything that we built so far, so they'll need to be the same length as our tops and bottoms. So 22 inches long, and they look like that they're about 1.5 inches wide. You'll just line the bottom of your strip up with the bottoms of your cubbies, throw some wood glue in behind that, and attach with brad nails. Do that for all three, and you now have cubbies. Now, as far as the little label holders, that's exactly what they are. It's just label holders. So just hop on the Amazon, type in vintage label holder, and if you look around, you can find these things for dirt cheap. And then with those fastened into place, depending on what type of material that you've used, you're done. If you'd like to go ahead and whitewash all of this like they have, go for it. But this would be one of those builds that you'd want to try out in different colors and stains. Just by doing something like that, you have made your potential customer base a lot bigger. Now they're wanting $100 a piece for one of these, and honestly, that's not a bad price. If it were me, I'd knock these things down to about $75 a piece and let them roll. All right, so for this next one, I've actually seen several different versions of this over the last couple of years, but what I've noticed is that they are moving into bestseller lists. So that's a red flag, meaning that we need to look into it. And that's going to be these wooden bathtub boards. So these things are designed for relaxing, chilling in the bathtub, which makes them great gifts. And to be honest, because I don't take baths, well, not like wash my body, I take showers, I'm a shower guy. Whenever I first saw these things, I was like, okay, who would want a board going across their bathtub? But then thinking about it, I'm like, well, there's a lot of people that like to just soak in the tub, and this would be super handy to put your cell phone on, or a book, or whatever bathtub people do. I have no clue. But there is one thing that I know: for the price tag of $50 for a board, I'm going to check it out. So there's really not a whole lot to break down here. It's an 8-inch by 32-inch board. Then you'll notice that there's a couple of smaller boards on the bottom of your long board. These smaller boards are on there for a couple of different reasons. One of the big ones is to hold it in place from side to side. That way you don't accidentally hit it and everything that's sitting on top of the board falls into the water. Then the other big reason we have these two boards underneath is to help prevent bowing of the material. So obviously those are probably going to be a little under 8 inches long, and you'll use the same material that you did for your board. So all the material that I'm looking at here seems to be 3/4 to 1 inch thick. If you do not get a perfect seal on this, I mean, it's all around moisture, this board is going to cup. So the underboard is going to help to prevent that cupping, but the seal that you put on there is going to be key. This thing needs to be sealed with at least 3 coats, and make sure to hit the end grain a couple of extra times. And if you're wondering about the indentions on the edges of this thing that's supposed to make it kind of look like live edge, it's all that they have done is sanded this down. So for material this thick, you can just take a palm sander, throw on some 40 grit sandpaper, and just add those contours to the edges. If you're wanting to make yours a little thicker, you can actually use an angle grinder and a flap disc. I've actually shown this technique before in some of my tips and tricks videos, but it's super easy to make a square board look live edge. But if you decide to sell some of these, again, staging is key. Make sure that you have several different colors and even designs. You may try some with multiple slats, multiple colors and stains, or even building in little parts that are made for a cell phone or a drink. Although it sounds like an odd one to throw on the list, again, anything that makes a bestseller or a trending list, and the reason for that is that they are selling these things. Okay, so this next one is actually a couple of different designs of the exact same thing, but they were both on a top seller list, and that's this riser. So you may be thinking, why is this little platform on a bestseller list? Why do people use these things? Well, people use these things to add dimension to their countertops or to their tables. So doing just what the name implies, it raises things off of the surface. So yes, this is 100% a decoration and used for decorating. So this first one that we're going to look at, it was $50 for a set of 2, which, since it's going to be a set of 2, price is really not that bad. But what caught my eye is just how simple these things are to make. So all the material that they use for this, besides the legs, is 1/2 inch thick. The legs themselves, those look like that they're 1x1s. And the total height for this thing is going to be right around 3.5 inches. Let's say our 4 legs, if we're going to be using 1x1 material, they're only going to be 3 inches long. And every part of this thing, if it were me, I would make it out of a 2x4 or 2x material. So I'd go ahead and get my 1x3 legs cut and out of the way. And then I would take my 2x material and cut a few strips that were 1/2 inch thick by 1.5 inches wide. And then I would use those strips for everything else. The overall dimension of this is a 12x18. So let's go ahead and start with just the frame that attaches to the legs. For the sides, we're going to be needing 2 boards that are 12 inches long. And then for the front and back, 2 boards that are 18 inches long. Then I would actually assemble that little frame upside down, just put it on a flat surface, put your 4 legs on the inside corners, add some wood glue, brad nail from the outside, and now you have your frame. But the only thing left to do is to add your boards on top. Now it looks like that they've used some wider boards, and that's fine. You can use any type of material that you want for the top, just as long as you're covering that surface area. But if you're using the strips for a 2x, you're going to be needing 9 pieces that are 18 inches long to make this top. And then to attach to the top, wood glue, brad nails, or crown staples. This is made to look rustic. So if you have saw marks on the sides of your boards from cutting it, leave them. This is intended to look old and intended to have imperfections. So the nail holes from the brad nailer, as you see, they haven't tried to cover them, fill them, anything. It's a part of the look. Keep it rustic, and if it's not rustic enough, dent it up, scratch it up, and make it look rustic. Once you add your material cut down into strips, I bet you could make one of these in less than 10 minutes. And the other riser that caught my eye was this one. So why did this one necessarily catch my eye, besides being on the trending list? Okay, so take a look at these legs. These legs are why it's on the trending list and why there's not a lot of competition for it. People think that this intricate looking leg is super hard to make. It's not at all. I was able to knock this one out in just a couple of minutes. So let me show you a couple of different ways to do this, and keep in mind it does not have to be just for this project. Any project that you wanted a fancy shaped leg, you can use what I'm about to teach you for that one as well. So this first way that I'm going to show you is this technique that is typically used on a bandsaw called square wood turning. But we're not going to be using a bandsaw. We're going to be using a jigsaw. So I'm going to be using some 1.5 by 1.5 material, which is really going to be the max that you're going to be able to cut with a jigsaw. So just like if I were making a large pedestal or something like that, first thing that I'm going to do is to make a template. And this is it. I've just taken a 1/4 inch piece of scrap plywood and just cut out this little leg shape. So I'm just going to take my little template and just trace it out onto one side of my board, giving me something like this. For this, you're going to be needing to use a scroll jigsaw blade. And as you can tell by this one, I've used it a lot and it's pretty much shot. So I'm probably going to burn this wood with the tight cuts. But since it's something that's going to be painted, really doesn't matter. Then I'll just cut this shape out. But there's one thing that you are going to need for the next step. That's going to be the part that you just cut out. So don't toss that just yet. And as expected, I burnt this pretty good. But once you've made your first cut, let's just simply flip this over with the cut facing up. I'm going to take the piece that I just cut out. I'm going to tape it back into place. Now with that taped back into place, it gives us a flat surface to work with. And this time I'm going to face my profile to the left. Trace that out and we'll cut this out. So now the piece that just fell off has 2 pieces in it, and you have a 3rd off piece there. But with those gone, that has left you with a profiled leg. Pretty cool. Now you would just cut this off the length, do a little bit of sanding, and then throw some paint on to cover up these burn marks. So that's one way to get this little profiled leg look. Now let me show you another way that you could do this and not have to worry about these burn marks. And for this, I'm going to be using a spindle sander. If you don't have a spindle sander, you could also use the rounded end of a benchtop belt sander. But basically what you're going to do is to mark out your profile, just like that we did before, on 2 of the edges. And we're really just going to be using this to determine our depth. Then you'll just use the sandpaper diameter that best fits your profile, and then just start eating away at the material on your cove. Once you get one side done, just flip it over until the coves meet. And just like that, you end up with something that looks like this, ready to be trimmed up and installed. So now that you see just how easy it is to make one of these, let's get into how they made the rest of this and how they're getting $80 for a set of 3. So the largest one of this set of 3 is a 12 by 12. Then they just drop a couple of inches in size all the way down to the smallest one. And the legs are just a bit shorter on the smallest one. Other than that, everything else is exactly the same. That is just a square board in the middle, and they have used a brad nailer to attach some trim to the side. If you're comfortable using a router, even better. You can knock this out without having to buy any trim. But let's say that you've decided to use trim. They've used like a rounded trim on theirs. I'm not a big fan of that, so I'm going to kind of show this using some fluted trim. So these legs look like that they're inset just a little bit, and then they've used a couple of brad nails to hold those into place. Probably some wood glue. So to get that inset, that top is only about 1/2 of an inch thick. at most. So I have a 1/2 inch thick piece of material here and some typical 3/4 trim. If you were to line your trim up flush with the top, that's going to leave you that extra 1/4 inch of space to attach your legs. Then they just taken the trim, cut it at 45 degrees, popped them into place with some brad nails. You can tell that they started with a base coat of paint of black and then just lightly went over with a different color on each one so that the black could kind of shine through in certain areas. It's as simple as that. Now with the top only being square, if this thing just had square legs on it, it wouldn't be on the bestseller list. These little contoured legs is what sets these things off and why they're selling the heck out of these things. Imagine taking a pile of wood and turning it into something amazing. Now, imagine doing that without years of frustration. You do not need a fancy workshop, expensive tools, or years of experience. With Woodworking Kickstart, you'll build confidence and real skills in no time. So you can spend years making mistakes and learning the hard way like I did, or you can start building with confidence today. So join me in Woodworking Kickstart and let's get your journey started. And for this next one, there were a couple of different things that caught my eye. One thing was that they were pretty neat and I know where to find the material to make these. And the next thing was the price. These primitive farmhouse nesting tables are $1,200 for a set of 3. So what actually makes these things unique? Nothing makes these things unique enough to be worth $1,200, but because of the legs, they are neat. So you notice for the top of these tables or benches, they're just whatever material they had laying around. I mean, they're curved, they're warped, it's whatever. The main thing is going to be the legs. And most of these legs look like that they have a live edge. So where are they getting all this live edge material that's only about this wide? Their local sawmill. That's where they're getting it. So let's say that this sawmill is cutting things down into walnut boards. They're going to start off by slicing the tree just like this all the way down. Every single one of those boards is going to have a live edge. Then they're going to group them into sizes that they can get a straight board out of the middle by removing the 2 live edges. So whenever they go to cut this perfect board out of the middle, the 2 live edges are cut off and they are scrap. So yes, this company has hit up their local sawmill for their scrap edges, and you could do the same thing because every sawmill out there will have piles of these edges laying around. Depending on where you're at, since they are a business, they cannot burn this stuff, so they either have to chip it up or pay and take it to a landfill. So in most cases, they'll be more than happy to get rid of it. And again, I know this is not going to apply to all of you, but I want you to think that way whenever you look at something. Just like in that scenario. Look at the picture and think, where in the world could they get that much material with live edges? And oftentimes, whenever you think outside of the box and think divergently, it allows you to come up with ideas like this. And that, not necessarily this project, but that mindset and that way of thinking is how you make money with woodworking. Till next time, we'll see ya.